Joining us right now on TVP World is Mr. Olexiy Haran, comparative politics professor from the University of Shangri-La Academy, as well as Steven Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Now we'll be discussing the topic of Zelensky's globe-trotting diplomatic offensive, and starting with Mr. Haran, can you first help us understand how successful this is compared to the previous attempt at garnering support for Ukraine?
Well, I would say now it's there was international support, and we know about it, to Ukraine starting from the Russian aggression. Why this round is very important? Because we are moving to Global Peace Summit in Switzerland, and Ukraine suggested 10-point formula of President Zelensky how to reach peace. This summit will be held without Russia. The next summit could be with Russia. Why now it's without Russia? Because Russia is aggressor, and it's very important now to demonstrate the unity of many countries of the world regarding peace plans, because Russia is aggressor. Russia do not put forward any peace plans. They are saying only that they would like to keep their next territories. So it's very important to secure participation also from the countries of the so-called Global South. We hear that China is not participating, basically not surprising, because China's narrative is very close to the Russian one, and basically in their rhetoric they on the same page with with Russia, unfortunately. However, we know that other countries will participate. For example, India will participate, Argentina will participate at the highest level, Chile will participate at the highest level. So there is a continuing diplomatic fight, and it will last, I believe, until the very opening of the conference, because there are forces which would like to secure success of this Global Peace Summit, and there are others like Russia and, as I have said, unfortunately, China, which would like to undermine these efforts.
All right, Mr. Moore, can you help us understand this decision of not having Russia in the peace summit? On one hand, we do understand the argument that Russia, being the aggressor, would be counterproductive to being in the peace summit. On the other hand, isn't it a little bit unrealistic to try to come to any sort of results without having one of the biggest countries that is actually involved in the conflict in the dialogue in the first place?
Yeah, well, this is a peace summit that is not necessarily about peace. And this is what it's about. We are in a world war, and you can argue about whether it's a World War III or whatever it is, but we're in a world war. We've got China, we've got North Korea, we've got Iran, we've got all these countries that don't care about human life that are banding together to help Russia and Ukraine. And of course, in Israel, the first place that Hamas went after October 7th was Russia. So this is an important exercise in building unity behind Ukraine. And Ukraine right now has some diplomatic momentum. And, I worked every day for the last 6 months trying to get the aid bill passed in Washington. And I live in Kyiv. I was going back and forth between DC and Kyiv. And, now there is once again momentum behind Ukraine in DC. And so let's look at what Ukraine needs to accomplish, again, outside peace, because, Ukraine's point of view is peace happens whenever the Russians leave Ukraine. And Russia's point of view is that peace will happen when they denazify Ukraine. Like, what does that mean? How do you appeal to that? So here's the advantage of what's happening here right now at this peace conference, or will be happening soon. And let's look at France as an example. France has been a great partner with Ukraine in terms of rhetoric. I think that one of the reasons that the aid bill a month ago got passed in Washington, D.C. is because France is throwing off a 100-year reputation election as the military coward of Europe, and it kind of shamed some Republicans on Capitol Hill into voting for the Ukraine aid. And France also has tens of billions of dollars in Russian money that under the Repo Act in the United States and similar acts around Europe can be used against Russia for either for rebuilding or for military aid or for a number of things. But so and so with France and Belgium and Germany and some of these other countries in Europe that have so much Russian confiscated assets, doing these kind of coalition building exercises that we're going to see at this peace summit, that's really crucial for Zelensky in Ukraine.
Right. Mr. Haran, so I would like to also expand on that because we do know that China is not going to be attending this peace summit. Do you think it's because they do realize that this is more of an attempt at building a coalition within Ukraine's allies, or do you think that there's any other rhetoric going on when it comes to China's denial of attending the summit?
Well, as I have said, Chinese narrative is very close to Russian one. And actually, China is benefiting from the war in Ukraine. Why? Because Russia is to move closer to China, and actually Russia is becoming a vassal of China. On the other hand, China would like also to weaken the West. So that's why I would say they are benefiting from this conflict. But the very important thing is the nuclear security, because China is also interested in nuclear security. And I would like to end a little bit before. China actually demanded from Russia to stop nuclear rattling. Unfortunately, Russia now is coming back to do the same. But regarding Global Peace Summit, look, the formula which was suggested by Zelensky is about 10 items. What should be done? However, for this first meeting, there was a decision to limit it to 3 points. First, freedom of navigation and food security. Second, nuclear safety. And third one, exchange of prisoners and release of deported Ukrainian children. Why it's limited to these 3 issues? Because there's no reason why all the countries of the world may unite around it. It's not about taking sides. It's about basic principles for humanity, how to survive, to overcome food problem, to overcome nuclear problem, and to overcome the deportation of children, So we hope that if we concentrate on these 3 issues, there would be more possibilities to involve more countries of the world to participate in this first global summit of peace.
Right. So I do want to dig in a little bit on these 3 points that you're talking about, because like you mentioned, these, I think, very few countries would actually argue against food security, de-escalating nuclear threat, safety of children and such. So do you think that the support, Mr. Moore, support for these points will actually be able to achieve what Mr. Haran mentioned in bringing in even more countries to be on the side of this rhetoric?
Completely agree. This is a coalition building exercise for the Ukrainians. Those are 3 things that any rational and sane country could not argue against, except Vladimir Putin. You might recall when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin a few months back, he asked them, please, can you release the Wall Street Journal journalist that you've had in prison for nearly a year now, just as a gesture of goodwill. And he said, look, I've done a lot of goodwill. I'm tired of it. I'm not doing any more goodwill things. And the Wall Street Journal journalist is still in jail. So this is not going to get any children out of Russia. It's not going to improve. It's not going to make Russia stop threatening to use nuclear weapons. What it's going to do is it's going to take the rational, sane countries that value human life and give them a rallying point around Ukraine. And so there's other things that can develop out of it. And again, I mentioned the Repo Act, which is using Russian money to prosecute the war, rebuild Ukraine, or getting the Biden administration to let Ukraine use American weapons to strike inside Russia. There's a lot of international work that needs to be done, and this peace summit is going to be a great rallying point to get people to come around Ukraine.
Right, like Mr. Haran has mentioned, trimming down from 10 items to 3 key points might be actually a very politically smart move when it comes to the coalition building exercise like you mentioned. So, Mr. Haran, I would also like to talk a little bit about the Singapore meeting that's taking place right now in Shangri-La, because this is actually one of the rare opportunities that maybe Zelensky get to speak with the Chinese side as well as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd. Are there any expectations coming out of this format, even though this is mostly around the Indo-Pacific? That must be a very rare opportunity for Zelensky to pursue.
Well, frankly speaking, I don't think that there would be kind of breakthrough in explaining China what we want. We did a lot of things to explain. They know, they understand who is behind the war, they know everything about the war, but still they stick to Russian narrative, unfortunately. So I do not have very much hope for talks between Zelensky and the delegation in Singapore. I think it's more for Chinese delegation and American delegation to exchange views on the situation in the Pacific. However, I think this is the visit to Singapore is a great possibility for President Zelensky to address the leaders of this region. And this is important given future global summit of peace, because there's still a debate who participate and at what level.
All right, and Mr. Moore, do you echo that sentiment, or do you have any other expectations coming out of the Singapore conference?
I think, again, the Singapore conference is something that's important for Zelensky to do because he needs to be shown as someone who is searching for peace, searching for international partners. Every day, all day, I fight against Russian propaganda that comes into the United States. And one of the narratives is that Zelensky is some kind of monster and wants to prolong this war whenever Vladimir Putin is a man of peace and just wants peace. And it's just mind-blowing nonsense. And so this is important for Zelensky to do. And this sort of drumbeat, this sort of campaign for him to wage with international partners, and it builds credibility in the United States. And he's going to have to go back to, unless miraculously the war is over by the end of the year, he's going to have to go back to the United States and ask for another tranche of weapons, and it's going to get more and more difficult. And so, by him building allies around the world and knocking back some of this Russian propaganda, he's building public support in Washington, D.C., America, and the capitals of Europe that are going to get him the additional weapons that he needs when the time comes.
All right, thank you so much for helping us spell that out and painting the bigger picture. It's very informative. So thanks again for being with us on TVP World. Appreciate it, Mr. Olexiy Haran, Mr. Steven Moore. Good to have you guys.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Benjamin.